The day it happened, the sun was already an enemy. It hung in the sky like a furnace, pouring fire down on our little two-story house, turning the air thick and sticky, making every breath feel like it carried dust and heat. I had been sitting in my room, fanning myself with a piece of cardboard, sweat soaking the collar of my faded t-shirt, when my mom burst in like a storm. Her lips curled the way they always did when she was looking for someone to blame. "You think you can talk back to me in my house?" she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. My dad followed behind her, silent but with that dangerous glint in his eyes that meant he was just waiting for an excuse to step in. "I just said it's too hot, Mom," I whispered, my voice cracking, knowing any louder would just make it worse. I had asked for a glass of water after hours of chores, nothing more, but my mom acted like I'd declared war. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video. "Too hot?" she laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that made my stomach clench. "You think you've got it bad? You've been nothing but attitude all day. Maybe you need some time alone to sweat out that smart mouth." I glanced at my dad, silently begging for him to intervene, but he just crossed his arms and looked away like I wasn't even his kid. My mom grabbed my arm, her nails digging in hard, and dragged me up the narrow hallway toward the attic stairs. My heart pounded because I already knew what was coming. This wasn't the first time they'd locked me away when they decided I needed to learn a lesson. But today was different. Today, the heat was unbearable. "Please, Mom," I said, stumbling over my words as she shoved me toward the wooden ladder that pulled down from the ceiling. "I won't talk back again. I'll be good. It's too hot up there." She just sneered. "Good. Maybe it'll teach you something." The attic was like stepping into an oven. The air was so thick it burned my lungs. Dust floated like ash in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the tiny, grimy window. My mom shoved me inside, my bare feet sticking to the hot wooden boards. Before I could plead again, she pulled the ladder up, slammed it shut, and I heard the sharp click of a padlock snapping into place. The silence after that was deafening except for my own breathing, shallow and fast, in the occasional creak of the house baking in the sun. I pressed my ear to the trap door, but all I heard was my mom's voice from below, dripping venom. "Maybe when you've sweated out that attitude, you'll come out grateful." My dad just grunted in agreement, his voice cold and distant. "She's lucky we let her stay in this house at all." I stumbled to the tiny window, but it barely opened, and the air that came through was hotter than the attic itself. My throat ached for water, my lips dry and cracked already. My hair stuck to my neck as I curled up in the corner, every inch of me drenched in sweat. Hours dragged by like years. Every muscle screamed for relief. Every thought swirled between panic and a desperate question. What did I do to deserve this? Why do they hate me this much? But then, as the sky outside shifted from blistering white to the deep red of late evening, another thought slipped in, a sharper one, a colder one. They had locked me up to break me, to make me beg, to remind me that in their house, their rules were law. They thought this heat wave was their weapon, that my suffering was entertainment, that I would come out of that attic crawling and apologizing. But as the hours passed and my tears dried on my cheeks, a different kind of fire grew in me, one that matched the suffocating heat, but burned in my chest, not on my skin. If they wanted me to sweat out my attitude, fine. I would sweat out every last ounce of fear, too, because this wasn't just another punishment I'd survive. This was the day they taught me exactly how far they'd go to hurt me, and it was the day I decided one thing for certain. They thought this house was their kingdom, their throne of power where they ruled by cruelty and control. But one day, I would make them feel what I felt in that attic. I would make them understand helplessness. And when I was done, they would choke on the heat of their own hatred. Lying on those burning boards, my breath shallow, my body screaming for water, I made a promise to myself under that locked hatch. One day they would regret every second they left me to suffer. One day, I would turn their own house into a prison of their making, and they wouldn't escape until they understood what it meant to beg for mercy and be ignored. And as the padlock clicked again hours later, the ladder creaking open with my mom's smug face peering down at me, I didn't cry, didn't beg. I just stared back, quiet and calculating, already building the plan in my head that would make this the last time they ever treated me like a prisoner in their home. I didn't sleep that night. My skin still burned from the hours in the attic, my lips cracked from thirst, my muscles aching from lying on the scorching floorboards. But the pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the way my parents laughed as they passed my door after unlocking the attic. My mother's mocking voice echoing, "See, a few hours without water fixed that attitude. Maybe next time you'll learn faster." I stared at the ceiling, my fists clenched under the thin blanket on my bed. That attic wasn't just punishment. It was a declaration, a reminder that in their house I was a prisoner. I wasn't their child, not really. I was a nuisance to be locked up, starved, mocked. They thought they owned me, that their cruelty was just discipline, that my suffering was their right. By morning, something inside me had changed. My tears had dried, replaced by a steady, icy calm. I couldn't undo the years they'd stolen from me. I couldn't erase every time they'd locked me up, slapped me down, told me I was lucky to have a roof over my head. But I could make sure they never held power over me again. I could make sure they understood what it was like to beg for relief and be denied. And this time, the lesson would last forever. I started planning quietly. Over the next few weeks, every time my parents left the house, I watched and listened. I learned the rhythm of their days, their morning routines, their endless gossip sessions, the way my dad double-checked every window but left the garage unlocked. I paid attention to the old thermostat that barely worked, to the new smart locks my dad bragged about installing so no one could ever get in or out without his say-so. He thought it made him the king of this house. He had no idea it would become his cage. I saved money from every small job I could get at school and around the neighborhood, hiding every dollar in a shoebox under a loose floorboard. I researched things on the library computer they'd never let me look up at home. How long heat could build in a sealed house, how ventilation worked, how to override a smart lock system. I wasn't just dreaming anymore. I was designing. They noticed I was quieter, but they mistook it for obedience. My mom smirked every time I lowered my eyes, thinking she'd finally trained the attitude out of me. My dad stopped calling me ungrateful for a while, convinced he'd scared me straight. They thought they'd won, but every time they laughed at my silence, they had no idea I was counting the days, waiting for the perfect moment to return their kindness. The chance came faster than I expected. The forecast announced another brutal heat wave, hotter than the last one. I overheard my parents bragging about how they'd survived the last one without spending a dime on air conditioning. They laughed about how suffering builds character, how I was finally learning not to complain. That night, while they slept, I unlocked their precious smart lock control box hidden in the hallway closet. I had been watching for weeks, memorizing every code my father typed in. I tweaked the system carefully, my hands steady despite the adrenaline rushing through me. By morning, the house was under my control, every door programmed to lock tight on my command, every window set to seal, the thermostat locked on high heat with a single button press from my phone. The next day, as the sun climbed and the air grew heavy, I waited. I watched them lounge in the living room, smug and self-satisfied, mocking me about how kids these days wouldn't last a day without their parents feeding them. My mother smirked, repeating that same line she'd spat when she locked me in the attic. "Maybe you'll sweat out the attitude one day." I looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, I wasn't afraid anymore. My voice was calm, even casual, as I said, "Maybe today isn't my lesson. Maybe it's yours." They blinked at me, confused. That's when I quietly tapped my phone. The sound of every electronic lock clicking shut echoed through the house like a chain snapping into place. My parents jumped up, rattling the doors, their confidence faltering when none of them budged. I stood there leaning against the wall, my face unreadable as I whispered, "Welcome to the attic. Let's see how much attitude you can sweat out." The temperature began to climb. The house became what the attic had been for me that day, a suffocating oven with no escape. They pounded on doors, shouted threats, screamed my name, but I stayed calm, letting them feel the panic I had felt, the thirst, the helplessness. Every minute was another drop of justice dripping down the walls of that house. And as I sat there watching them realize they had no control anymore, no power, no way out, I finally understood what it felt like to be free. This wasn't just revenge, it was balance. It was every locked attic door, every dry throat, every cruel laugh paid back in full. But this was only the beginning. By the time I was finished, my parents would never again mistake cruelty for control. And this house they'd used as their throne of power, it was about to become their longest, hottest punishment yet. The moment the locks clicked shut, the mood in the house shifted like a storm rolling in. My mother's smugness drained away first, replaced with confusion, then disbelief. My father stomped toward me, rage boiling in his eyes, his voice low and threatening like always. "Open the door now," he growled, his fists tightening at his sides. I met his gaze without flinching for the first time in my life. "No," I said simply. The word felt like freedom rolling off my tongue. The thermostat beeped softly as the heat climbed. 88, 92, 96 degrees. The sun outside pounded on the sealed windows like a hammer on steel. My parents began pacing, tugging at doorknobs, shouting commands that had always worked on me before. But I wasn't that scared kid anymore. My mom's voice turned shrill, desperate under the anger. "What is this? Some kind of game? Stop it right now!" I sat down on the armrest of a chair, phone in hand, my voice cold and steady. "No, this isn't a game. This is a lesson. One you should know well. You locked me in that attic with no water, made me beg for air, made me feel like my life wasn't worth a glass of water. Remember what you said? Maybe you'll sweat out the attitude." My dad banged on the locked front door until his palms left red marks. "You ungrateful brat," he spat, sweat already glistening on his forehead. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" "You gave me pain," I said sharply, my voice cracking with years of swallowed screams. "You gave me fear. You gave me a life where love felt like a fairy tale I'd never read, and when the heat nearly killed me, you laughed." The temperature ticked higher, the air thick like syrup. They stripped off their outer clothes, their arrogance melting with the sweat dripping down their faces. My mom tried another tactic, her tone turning fake sweet. "We were just teaching you discipline, honey. We didn't mean it. Please, unlock the doors." I stood and walked slowly toward the hallway, stopping just before the thermostat. I wanted to see their faces, to let them see mine as I said the words that had burned in my throat for years. Discipline? Locking a child in an attic during a heat wave isn't discipline. It's cruelty. It's what cowards do when they need to feel powerful. My dad staggered back, collapsing onto the couch, panting. My mom clutched the armrest, her face pale beneath the flush of heat. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes, not mine. The same fear they had drilled into me, now living in their chests, choking them like smoke. I leaned on the wall, my voice quiet but sharp as glass. "This is the house you ruled with threats and padlocks. Today, it's your attic. Today, you're the ones sweating out the attitude." Minutes stretched into an hour. They shouted less, begged more, whispering to each other between desperate gulps of hot air. My mom finally broke, her voice trembling, cracking like thin ice. "We were wrong," she choked out. "We shouldn't have done that to you. We shouldn't have hurt you like that. Please, please, just let us out." I let the silence hang, let their words sink into their own ears, let them taste the regret they never thought they'd have to feel. Then, I walked to the thermostat, my finger hovering over the control. "Now you understand what it's like," I said softly. "Now you know what you taught me. that love can be locked away, that water can be denied, that suffering can be entertainment. Maybe this will remind you every time you look at me, every time you see this house, that cruelty has a price. I tapped the screen, lowering the temperature. The locks released one by one with a heavy click. My parents didn't speak as they stumbled toward the door, drenched, shaking, faces hollowed by fear and shame. They glanced at me once, as if seeing a stranger. As they opened the door to leave, I said the last thing I needed them to hear. You called me attitude, you called me ungrateful, but after today, you'll remember me as the one person who made you feel everything you made me live through, and you'll never, ever forget. They left without a word. The house fell silent except for the soft hum of the cooling air. I sat down on the floor where the heat had once been unbearable for me, breathing slowly, finally free. The attic would never open for me again, and the kingdom they built on fear had burned to the ground in their own sweat. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video?